Good evening. Hi, it's Scott MacArthur here, and welcome to Artefact, where we look at the art and science of storytelling. Well, it's been quite a week. Thanks very much for joining me. I've got a few things of housekeeping I've got to tell you. The first thing is a massive thank you, because the feedback that Restream is the platform that I use to do this have had about this and about the interaction we've been having together has led them to come to me, and they're now going to be sponsoring this little vlog. So I'm absolutely chuffed to bits about that. I'm not quite sure exactly what it's going to look like. I'll keep you posted, but it's down to you guys. Thank you very, very much. Last week we had people from 6 countries, which is mind-blowing. I've only been going for 7 weeks, so this is the 8th week. So thank you for that. You'll notice that my usual background isn't here this week. That's because, well, I had an event today and I didn't have time to take it down, so that the artifact wall, if you haven't been here before, normally behind me I have all my old artifacts that I use for storytelling. So tonight we're going to do it slightly different. So I hope you don't mind the much more corporate looking background tonight, guys. So that's that. Next up, I've got David. Last week we had a guest artist last week, and I thought the show went quite well, but David wasn't happy with his connection. So what he's done is he's volunteered or asked if he could come back. And rather than speak, what David's going to do is he's actually going to live scribe for us to show you the power of the artist in actually helping bring a story to life. And if you remember last week, I spoke about how images can take away a lot of the noise that is caused by language, etc., and cultures, etc. So David's going to do that, and I've got an idea with one of my guests that I'm going to get him to help me look at quite a difficult subject, the subject of difference, basically diversity and inclusion, and I'm going to get him to draw the conversation. So I'm quite excited about that. The date's not set yet. It's probably going to be in the next 3 weeks, but that's another piece of quite important news. And then linked to that, I've put a call out now for guests on the show. I'm going to put themes out, so we're going to have a week about storytelling around diversity inclusion, and that's going to be called Diverse at the Heart of Diversity. But we're going to have other themes as well: love, hate, competition, business, whatever. And I will publish that on the various streams, and hopefully some of you would quite like to get involved. So that's all the housekeeping for this week. Not forgotten anything, so that can go. Right, now down to business. So this week we're looking at a subject that it's in the news. It's something that the government is telling companies that they need to be more empathetic towards their employees. And it's every time you open a magazine, you'll get Brené Brown talking about it, or you've got Simon Sinek talking about it. But I think it's something that is very much linked to story, and I will explain why in a minute or two. But as I always do, I'm just going to check. Can you hear me, folks? Can somebody let me know if you can hear me? I've got a few hellos, but can you just let me know if you can hear me okay? That would be helpful. I've got hi on YouTube. Thank you very much. Can anyone just confirm, or I'll just keep going if no one confirms, because it is a bit fiddly sometimes, particularly on LinkedIn. So if someone on LinkedIn could just say hello and that you can hear me, that would be much appreciated. And we can then move on. Now, let's have a little look here. Now, as I always do, I try to create a bridge between each episode. Thanks very much, Jill. That's great. I'm glad you can hear me. Thank you. That's magic. I try to create a bridge every week between the various episodes that we've been doing. And thanks, Paul. That's very great. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you. So I'm quite happy now. You can hear me. And this week, the bridges actually came from one of you. And it's quite dramatic, this bridge. And right at the end of last week's show, when we were looking at we were talking about doing a further episode about art, because the art of storytelling is a huge area, and we didn't even scratch. We were on air last week for 20 minutes more than we normally are, and we didn't scratch the surface. But one of you, Joe, who's normally on Facebook, I hope you're there, Joe, has sent me this image, and I'd like to show you, and I'd like you just to look at it for a minute and have a think about what it makes you feel and think. So this is obviously a sculpture, and I never told Joe this, but I've actually seen this. It's in Geneva by the lake, in the park by the lake, and it's quite dramatic. What does that make you What does that make you think or feel looking at that? Just type it into the chat, guys, and we'll have a... Hello, Dave Henson. Nice to see you. Renuven, who's that? Nice to meet you on YouTube. Excellent, excellent. Right. So when I saw this, and I said Joe sent me it a week ago, and I had seen it before, but it really hit me as something that really lands a powerful message. And for me, it was about well, the title kind of gives it away, melancholy, and indeed it does look very sad. But it made me think of loss. And I know that Joe, who I don't think is on, I think Joe might have got, I was speaking to her half an hour ago. It made me think of loss. It made me think of emptiness. It made me think of grief. And it's something, the minute you look at it, you relate to it. At least I do. I'll put it back on, guys, so you don't need to look at me all night. I think it's a dramatic piece. And let's just see, let me get in the comments. Has anyone got a view on this? What do you think of it, folks? I don't want to rush this because it's quite a dramatic, sad. He looks empty. Yes. Makes me feel sad. One from Jill, thanks. He looks empty, almost like a mouth with a tonsil. My goodness, yes. Yes, it is. I hadn't seen that, Jill. Absolutely. Yeah, that's amazing. I've looked at this so many times and I have not seen that. Thank you. Makes me feel worn out, from Doug. What Joe said to me was that it made her think about a miscarriage and how you have to carry that loss with you throughout your life. And gosh, when I started to think about that, I have to say I didn't end up with a dry eye. I think it's quite dramatic. And I think the value of that, well, for me, it's just beautiful. But equally, I like the idea of sculpture and art generally being on public display, because it, you know, it's like some of the wonderful art we have all over the UK and all over the world, that it just makes you stop and think. And in these days of busyness, that type of art really, really hits here. And that therefore links quite beautifully to this week's topic. Shelley, you've just, that's a good, Shelley's just said despair. Yeah. I don't know if many people will sit and eat their lunch next to that sculpture, will they? But nevertheless, it's a reminder that, you know, these things are part of our lives. And what the actual sculptor said was that he wanted to remind people that everyone carried things like this in their everyday life. So I hope you found that. I know it's not an exciting image, but it's definitely a thoughtful image. And it's one that I'm going to come back to in a couple of weeks' time, I think, because it's so powerful. And there's another artist called Celaya, he's a Cuban-American artist who works very much in that space. And I really want to talk through how he creates these stories using mainly sculpture. He does painting as well, but if you've never heard of Enrique Martinez Celaya, you're in for a treat. He's an absolutely fantastic artist, and his whole role is to try and show that we have common feelings, common stories across the world. And here's Jill again. The hands are very delicate and artistic looking. Do you know what, Jill? You're very good at spotting detail. You're better than I am. I hadn't spotted. I need to look at it again myself. Yeah, they are, aren't they? Beautiful. Good spot. Good spot. Well, thank you. So that's our bridge, and that's our bridge into this week about empathy. And I'd like to start just by reminding everybody, and I know there's a few first-timers on this week, the purpose of this is that I got caught up in a number of like difficult story environments, difficult environments where we're trying to transform organizations. I've worked all over the world doing this for over 300 companies now. And I started to see the power of story, and I implemented it in a number of companies as a very powerful tool. And if you go back a couple of episodes, you'll see me talking about, I did a thing called Polish Your Shoes. So if you look 2 episodes ago, I talked about a little methodology called Polish Your Shoes. But what that was about was this. And it's basically one of the mottos or motifs for this show. And it's this, it's that facts tell, but stories sell. Facts tell, but stories sell. And it seems so simplistic, but as a former scientist and someone who's worked a lot in the scientific communication community, and then in the corporate community world in comms for 20 years, you do see a lot of people thinking that facts are the answers. Now, I'm a scientist, and I'm very strongly driven by evidence-based thinking and evidence-based communication. However, I think there's reasons why we need to think more about story today than ever before. But I will come back to that in a minute or two. But first of all, I'd like to. Oh, Jill, you're back again. I need to show Jill's comments here. That's beautiful. In the quiet heart is hidden sorrow that we cannot see. Yeah, that's gorgeous. If that was you, Jill, that's absolutely lovely. I love it. Thank you very much for contributing that. Thank you. Gosh, that's amazing. So the first thing I'd like you to, second thing, sorry, I'd like you to think about is empathy. What is empathy? Have a go. Get anyone have a guess or let me know what they think empathy is. How would you define it? How would you define empathy? And I often get asked about the difference between, compassion and empathy, but I'd like just to hone in on empathy itself. What do you think it is? I've got a lovely definition here, but I'd like you to have a go at it, because one of the things I've seen in many programs, mainly in transformation programs, mainly around things like employee engagement or performance, or these words, there are so many definitions of them that they're almost meaningless. They disappear. Employee engagement's a classic. I mean, I was heavily involved in the employee engagement movement for 10 years, and we started very well, but I think people are now getting to the point that no one understands it anymore, because there's so many definitions of it. Now, there is some work being done in the background on it, but it's not easy. So there's a couple of goes here. Hello, Michelle. Nice to see you. Hi. Here's Michelle's. Empathy is feeling what other person feels. Yep. Paul, thank you, Paul. How are you? Nice to see you, Paul. Putting yourself in others' shoes and feeling what they are feeling. Good one. Nice one. And another one here from David, being able to feel others' pain. Interesting, the word pain there. Anyone else got another one? I'll just check the other 2 platforms. Fine. Let me give you. Oh, here we go. Another one. Empathy is knowing on the deepest level, from Michelle. The one I like, and the one that it's quite similar to what a couple of you have said. This is the one I like. Empathy. You're curious not only about yourself from the outside, in other words, what people think about you, but you're interested in others from the inside. And I love that. I think that's a really powerful, really powerful way of defining it. But the one about that David said about pain, there's quite a lot of debate about that. And I know saying being against empathy is a bit like saying you don't like kittens, but there is actually a movement about an anti-empathy movement. And I mean, I've not got time to go into it in great detail, but if you are interested, and balance is important. This chap, I don't know if you've heard of him, Paul Bloom, he wrote a book just last year called Against Empathy. And he claims that it's impossible to have empathy unless you've experienced the same thing as the other. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do think it's a wise and thoughtful book, and I recommend it to you. I'll just put it back up again. Obviously, you'll get it in the play again, guys, if you want to watch it again. But it's called Against Empathy. So this is like a counterpoint, and I like counterpoint, as some of you know. There's a couple more comments here. I'm just going to show them. Jill has said, it's an ability for a person to feel alongside someone, to lean in and engage with a person, but not necessarily to go into sympathy, which may render you unable to retain objectivity. Oh, yeah. I might see that slightly differently, because I think maybe empathy can stop you from seeing things objectively. Don't know. That's still interesting. That's very interesting. Thank you. Joe, you are here. Another one, showing caring even without having experienced the person's loss. Yeah, that's the sort of counterpoint to the argument that's in that book by Bloom. And then finally, Doug's one, being able to understand someone through understanding their feelings. Big stuff. So yeah, these are all pretty much on the money, and I think that it's important. But remember last week, those of you who were here, and this is a very, very important graphic. Just get it on the screen. There you go. Sorry. It says here, reading allows us to see and understand the world through others' eyes. A good book or story is an empathy engine, and that was by Chris Riddell, and he drew the picture as well. And he's a former poet laureate, and he talks about stories being an empathy engine, and I love that. And I think that is the way I would like us to proceed with this, and to get into this, because there's so much around the need for empathy in the media at the moment that I think we need to maybe bring it to life. And I've got a thought for you on that, and I'll give you that in a few minutes. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Let me just get back to the chat. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I said a minute ago, it was a bit of a buzzword, empathy. Let me get this back off the screen, guys. Sorry. And it is. But there's a number of reasons why it's important, and of course it's the stories that create the empathy, and that's why it's part of this broadcast. But I think just in the last since 2016-ish, empathy has suddenly become even more important, and the way that's developed from my angle is through stories. The empathy engine is via stories. And let me explain to you why. We're currently, and this is a quiet revolution, everyone's heard about it, but I don't think a lot of people are quite immersed in it yet. And that's about synthetic media. You might have heard of it called alt facts or deep fakes or whatever. There's lots of language like this around at the moment. There's not really, like any other big change, there's not a common language yet. So there are different definitions of what this all means. But fundamentally, because of massive developments in technology, some of it's called AI. It isn't necessarily AI, but nevertheless, it's something that is talked about a lot in the media. We have so much data around us. It's like a fire hydrant. It's just, everywhere. The minute you go up in the morning, you've got data coming at you from all directions. And that is creating a number of problems. And I mean, it's not for here to talk about the bigger picture here, because I believe it's an existential risk. And it's something that people have to get their heads around. But one of the consequences that's important for this particular broadcast is that even if your organization or you as an individual are confident in your data, and I mean, 10 years ago, I was banging the drum for evidence-based leadership and HR, and I was publishing on it, and it was like, oh, this is really exciting. And now I'm actually pretty much against it. And that's because companies are so flooded with data, people can't see what's actually happening. Now, that is quite serious. And you can see it, I don't know if you know this, but there are farms, they call them data farms, in many, many countries where they're producing data. Some of it's real, some of it's not real. This is what's led to the beginnings and it's sort of the foundation of the QAnon movement. It is nonsense, but there's a little trickle of truth in it, and people are therefore drawn into it, and that has created an environment where we're losing faith in our institutions. And that means that companies and organizations and people like us, who are trying to, help people and change people, have got to look at this whole thing in a different way. And I genuinely believe that stories are the way to do it, because, as I said earlier, facts tell, stories sell. And I have very rarely, and I could name them in one hand, put them in one hand, come across companies that actually understand this stuff. I was working today with a major French IT company, And they've got me, gone in to talk to their people about storytelling and how, if it's not a story, it's not a communication, that sort of model that they're trying to get me to bring into their business, which is really interesting. But nevertheless, I think it's a very, very interesting temporary measure. It's not the absolute solution for all this data hydrant. But it's something I think we should consider. And let me just a little bit, I don't want to get into this in great detail, but there is another really interesting thing here, particularly if any of you are into technology. Although I'm very keen on the human agenda, and it's where I've spent 30 years of my career, I think the only way we can solve this massive data flood is actually through technology. Humans can't sense it. Humans can't tell the difference now between what they call synthetic and real data. I posted yesterday a thing on LinkedIn, which was just me fiddling about with one of the deep fake software apps, and I made myself look like, I put my face on Johnny Depp or whatever, and I mean, it wasn't great, but it was okay. And just 6 months ago, that would have cost millions of pounds. So every day, this isn't going exponentially, this is going double exponential. And it means, some of the top journalists are now saying that synthetic media will be all the media in the next 10 years. I think it could be sooner than that. So I'll park that, and we can talk about that in another place, because it's not really for today. But nevertheless, this is coming at us, and I think this is why storytelling has become even more important than it's ever been before. So let me just check the comments. There's a few here. Hello, Deborah. How are you doing? Joe, what have you got here? Oh, we've got Australia in the room. Andy, thanks for joining from Sydney. Very good. I like that. Nice to see you, mate. And Deborah, thanks very much for coming. Yeah, Jill nailed it, didn't she, Deborah? I thought it was very, very good. Empathy engine, I like that a lot. It's very compelling, David. I've got my artist friend drawing me an empathy engine at the moment. So what I've done is I've taken, if you look 2 shows back, I demonstrated a little model I'm developing around the word artifact, and to help people structure stories. And we're putting in all the bits of the letters, the definitions of the letters, into an engine. I don't know if you're here, David. I don't think you are, but that we're going to try and come up with an archetype for it. So yeah, it's quite cool. Empathy engine's fantastic. Yeah, but terrifying. It is terrifying. And people, somebody said to me yesterday, "Oh, we all know what alt facts is about." No, we don't. It is nascent. We're at the beginning of a tidal wave with this stuff. It is going to revolutionize everything. There are already companies working on bringing back actors from the 60s and 70s. There are incredible things happening in the movie industry. There are incredible things. There's a Obama speech on YouTube that's had 8 million hits, and it's fake. But people think it's real. This stuff is massive, and it can have political, social, relational, all sorts of impacts. But again, I better stop, because if I keep going, we'll be here at midnight on that subject, and it's not really why we're here. But so empathy is a big thing within that context. Does that make sense? And what I call that is it's the information ecosystem has been basically it's been polluted at the moment by all these different all this different stuff that's going on. So it's quite difficult. Now, yesterday, I'll just double check if there's any other comments. Yesterday, one of my very good friends, Andy, you know who he is, works for Coca-Cola, and he said, look, he's going through some issues with Coca-Cola. They've got, like a lot of companies at the moment, they've got quite a major downsizing program going on. And so here's another, Jill, I'm going to have to put your comment up, because they're always very good, aren't they? In the face of too much data, I am a fan of instinct. Ooh, right. If we can tune into that part of us that is instinctive, we have an ability to withstand confusion. You can call it God, the God within us. I don't agree. Science is about protecting us from our instincts, and I know that's controversial for some people. I get what you're saying, but I don't necessarily agree. I think we could have some fun with that, debating that, Jill, sometime. And here's Deborah's comment. I saw Janet Jackson do a duet on stage with Michael Jackson at the Albert Hall a few years ago. That was just a taste of how time can be distorted. I've seen it myself. I went to see a guy called Ronnie James Dio, a hologram, and it was his band. He died a few years ago, but it was his band and him as a hologram. It was absolutely spooky. And yeah, Deborah, dead Michael Jackson, I might add. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, Jill, I'm really interested in the view on instinct. We might need to come back to that and have a chat about it, because I mean, there are ways of looking at that don't necessarily agree with what you've said or with me. As often happens, is the truth will be in between somewhere. But anyway, so I back to Coca-Cola. What my mate said to me was that what Coca-Cola are saying to their people is that learning is the new pension. Now, I think I've seen a couple of other people talking about that on social media as well, but that was from the horse's mouth. Learning is a new pension. That's partly because they're closing down their pension schemes. Lots of companies are doing the same thing, and they're encouraging their people to get into learning. And for me, I think if that is true, and I think it could be, and that means that you're employable for a lot longer through learning. I think the key skill, and I've written this down just so we can get a screen grab of it. Let me just see. If it is the new pension, I think the subject that everybody needs to study is what I call social physics. And social physics, not my term, it's a chap called Sandy from Aberdeen, an academic friend of mine in Aberdeen that came up with the idea. But social physics is about understanding the complexity of interactions between people. And I think the key molecule, the key particle, if you like, stretching, forgive me for stretching the physics metaphor, is story. And I think that we need to change how seriously we take story. I really do believe it. And so if learning is a new pension, I honestly think the key subject everybody needs to be thinking about now is storytelling. Not telling other people's stories, telling your own stories predominantly. And I know there are loads of good storytellers in the room, which is great. And I'm going to give you a little idea for that both this week and another one next week to help you with your storytelling and to help others with their storytelling. Let me just see if I can put this on the screen. Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I've said it. So any comments on that? Does that make sense? Yes, thank you. It's like being in a band, this, where you've got one chat stream, but you've got a couple of platforms like Twitch and Pinterest that don't feed into the chat stream. So you're always jumping about between them. It's quite good. I quite like it, actually. It's quite cool. So anyway, okay, I'm going to tell you my first story tonight. Proper story, and as I normally do, I've got an artifact. Now, oftentimes I go to my wall and I lift one and we have a look at it, but this is a much more intimate, and I'm going to need a drink, guys, because I mean, it's nothing alcoholic. I've got Erdinger alcohol-free beer. Now, opening a can of beer on a live stream is probably not a great idea. Fingers crossed it doesn't go everywhere. Oh, it sounded a bit flat, didn't it? So this story. Andy says you are twitchy. Yeah, I'm trying to be twitchy. Twitch. I don't know if you know what Twitch is, folks. It's the biggest simulcast site in the world. It's where all the gamers go, and it's an incredibly complex place to get into as a professional. But I'm trying really hard. I've not been successful yet. I mean, not at all. It's hard graft. But nevertheless, if you're interested in doing live streaming and you want to see the best in the world, that's where they are. Twitch. Is a different level of competency. I mean, the YouTube guys are not even close to the Twitch guys. It's free. Have a look if you want to see what the real experts in this space are actually doing. Right. So I want to tell you this story, and this story is true. And my artifact is that. It's a Post-it. And I was doing some thinking, as some of you know, last week in a cafe, and I'm going to explain that in a minute or two. And I was reminded of this story, and it was another one in actually Doug. It was in Bath, and I was in a pub called the Pulteney Arms, which is a cracking pub. It's amazing because it's got interim lights, so it's got like these U-shaped lights. One of them's gas and one of them's electricity. And when they were bringing in electricity, they kept the gas because it was reliable. And I could often talk about it as the sort of analog digital differential. It's quite cool. But anyway, I was in that pub, and unfortunately, I was having quite a hard time at home. And it's my own fault. I had been traveling basically for 7 years, all around the world. If you remember that, Doug, I was like, one day I was in New York, next day I was literally in Sydney, the next day I was in Beijing, back to London. It was crazy, and I was exhausted. But the big problem was it had an impact on my relationship with my wife, the lovely Julie. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and she is what's called Michelle, actually, and she's a brilliant counsellor now. She wasn't at the time. And I said to her, you know, I'm not feeling very good. And she said, well, okay. And she just listened to me. And then she said something that it just blew my mind. Now, I've tried to remember this, and it might not be right, and I've heard similar things, but this is what she said to me, guys. She said, I'm not sure what to say to you at the moment, Scott, but I'm really glad that you told me. And I mean, that could have been straight out of, you know, one of the Cynic videos or Brené Brown or whatever. It's brilliant. And this was best part of 17 years ago. And she then, I mean, I said last week, listening is like touching at a distance. Listening is like touching at a distance. And she just let me talk. She said she couldn't understand it because she's gay and she'd never been through this sort of thing, but she just let me talk. And one of the issues, if any of you have been through the difficult process of divorce, is particularly when you've got young children, it's hellish. And particularly if you haven't, I mean, we didn't fall out as such, it just withered. And but I had to leave my children, and it was absolutely terrible. And my daughter and I, Anna, were very close friends, and we loved each other, and we used to spend all our time together. And what happened was, I'll take that off. What happened was, my friend said to me, she said, look, if there's a problem, you're not leaving your children. I know that's quite trite, but she said, just make sure they know what you think of them. So what I did was I went away and I sat down and thought, how could I demonstrate how I feel about the kids going forward? And I've not told this story for quite a long time. Sorry, it's going to get my emotions going again. And I thought, right, I'm going to do little notes for Anna. So every weekend when I went up to see her and then drop her off, I took her back to my place and then would take her and her brother back and drop them off. But I would sneak upstairs into her room and I would write a little note on Post-its, like just Daddy loves you, or I'll see you next week, well done, or, whatever, the little things about what was happening in the moment. She was only 7. And I wouldn't just leave them though, I would hide them in the room. So I would put them in a book, under a pillow, in a shoe. I got quite creative with that. And I did it, guys, for 5 years. And on the 5th year, I was having a chat with Julie. We're still actually friends, but I did one of these infamous or not famous good breakups. We're still friends. And I was talking to Jill and she said, I've got to show you something. I need a drink. And what she did was she took me up to the bedroom. And it's a tiny little room. And there was a wardrobe, and she opened the wardrobe, and inside the door of the wardrobe were all my Post-its. It was utterly beautiful, and I was obviously it's happening now, and it's ages ago. I mean, she's 20 now, but I was floored by this. And the funny thing is, I've told that story a few times. I told it last year in a pub in London with 100 half-cut people who had come along to see me speak at one of these Funzing. Used to be a company called Funzing. They've gone now, they've gone bust. And the room was really noisy. And as I say, they're all drinking. There was even a hen night on. So it was a really noisy room. And I told that story, and the room went like that. It just, the atmosphere in the room completely changed. There was people crying. I was crying. But what that did was it created a link between me and that audience. And even on the corporate stage, I did a keynote for Microsoft not long ago, actually, during lockdown. It was a virtual one. And I told that story. And the feedback I got was basically that story. You got them at that story. Because I was trying to demonstrate to them the power of story and how it can make you feel different. And if I'd said something like, 5% of fathers who are absent from their children, blah, you know where I'm going. Would that have created the same impact on you? Well, it wouldn't have done. And that's why stories are so, so powerful. True story. I managed to keep it together. Didn't have to drink too much. And Doug's just said, yeah, Doug, it's a great pub and it's still going through COVID. 60 seconds walk from where I'm sitting. Really? Has it still got the gas lights, Doug? You must tell me, because that was something to thank Joe. That's nice. Thank you for saying that. But for me, that story had almost gone. You know, I had I don't know how to describe it. I hadn't forgotten it because I told it last year, but just going through a process, and I'm going to tell you about it now, but going through a little process where I reminded myself of some of my stories was very, very powerful. And this is where I'm going to start to get into the sort of more practical stuff here. So I hope you enjoyed that story, but it's mainly to show, hopefully, that you can tell stories in all sorts of different ways, in all sorts of different environments, and to all sorts of different audiences. And as long as you're willing to be authentic, I think people really appreciate it. And it's why I get quite frustrated, not so much with speakers, but with managers, leaders who tell other people's stories. Now, I had a manager who used to always bring out, you know, the latest Malcolm. And I love Malcolm Gladwell, but he'd bring out Malcolm Gladwell says, you know, and that doesn't create empathy between you and your people. They can be quite good stories. I'm not saying they're not good stories, but when you tell your own stories, people see you. So back to that definition, you know, it's about understanding how people see you on the outside and you trying to understand them on the inside. And by telling stories, particularly as a leader, you get reciprocity. People give you their empathy back. They give you their stories back. There's nothing quite like it. Nothing quite like it. So thanks, Andy. Yeah, Doug, I'm trying my best not to cry here. It's one of those stories that hit me right between the eyes every time I tell it. So right, I'm going to introduce you to a little technique here. Now, this is dead simple, and I call it story storming. Not very creative, but I call it story storming. And what this is about, 2 years ago, when Michelle and others persuaded me to become a professional speaker, I started to think about this subject quite seriously, and I started to think about, you know, how am I going to do it? But I definitely knew the way I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to tell other people's stories. I wasn't going to lift a book and say, this book says. I might reference books, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do it. So I started to write down my own stories, and I've now got nearly 400 stories on my own, and it's in a spreadsheet and in a little book where I have detailed. What I've done is I created a spread, and it's really quite sad. I've got a spreadsheet every year of my life, and the way I do it, and I mean, this artifact thing, the reason I came up with this title, and actually I'm not going to pretend that the model came before the title. The title came first, and I'm now fitting the model into it. But what I decided to do was I wrote down all the years, and I got one of these books, you know, what happened that year. And I sat down and I thought, right, come on, let's see what I can remember. And I went into my memories and into my, you know, what did I do at primary school? You know, I lived in the Caribbean, then I lived in Ireland, and then I went and we moved to the Clyde Valley. Then I moved to where Andy and I were kids in Curluke, which is a part of Beirut in Scotland. And I started to go through every step of it. And, you know, I've been around a few years now, and I cannot see an end to me finding stories. So that image there, I'll put it back. This was an hour in a cafe with my spreadsheet, thinking about what was I doing, and I came up with half a dozen stories that I'd forgotten. I'd completely forgotten them. Now, I don't know. I mean, there's one here about, you know, I had a pet crow for a little while when I was living in Curluke. There's another one about, you know, my first ever achievement was peeing over a 10-foot wall at primary school. Another one was where I was a boss of 50 scary women in a fish factory who took the absolute mickey out of me for 3 years. It was amazing. I loved them, absolutely loved them. I've not told these stories, and I think that taking the time to sit down, and the way I do it now, I'm not as structured as other people. I like to just, you know, shoot the breeze and have a think about things. But what I've found I'm doing now is I've been doing an audio diary for 20 years. Well, I did it for 20 years. I stopped it about 6 years ago because I now use Facebook to do the same thing. But I did the odd, and I'm thinking about going back to it because it's so powerful. But there's a thing, and I don't often quote Tony Robbins, but one of the things that he says is, you know, a life well lived is life worth recording. And I absolutely agree with that. And then again, just yesterday, my daughter, who's this girl I told you about earlier, she's now Doug, she's 20. You'll remember her being born. And she's studying to be a mental health nurse. And she's in an all-male ward. And I said to her, I said, right, Anna, do you remember Dad's box of cassettes? Because I've got my diary in a little, I'm going to show that as an artifact one week. And she said, yeah. I said, you need to think about doing that. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, you know, things have already happened that you'll never want to forget. But if you don't write them down or don't record them, you'll forget them, or at least it's difficult to get them back out of your brain. This morning she texted me, she said, I've done my first page in my diary, Dad. I've started to record the stories. And she's in a mental health ward with criminal behaviours in the ward. It's quite a dangerous ward she's working in, and some cracking stories and scary stories. And just to round it off, and it's quite sad and poignant, but completely true. Now that she's working in these dangerous environments. When I was a scientist, I used to basically do partial autopsies. My best line is I went from human remains to human resources, boom, boom. And one day I was pushing this leg along in a big box along the corridor, and I bumped into this girl. She looked up at me, gorgeous girl. It was Julie. That's how I met my wife. So, you know, these things seem to come round, but that story storming idea, and I do it actively. I don't just say, oh, I'll do it, you know, maybe next week. I diarise it, and I try and do it every week. And I find there's never been a week where I've done this. And because of COVID and lockdown, I must have done it 50 times in the last 30 weeks. There's never a time when I don't come up with a story and I think, right, I'm going to use that story to explain this. And there's a saying, and I absolutely love this, and there's a saying from one of the great religious traditions, in the Quaker tradition, and it's this: it is let your life speak. And they use it as an admonition for, you know, to say to yourself, if I'm not telling my own story, I'm not being authentic. And guys, I think that is beautiful. Beautiful. Let your life speak. So we're just about finished now. I'd just like to check if there's any other chat. What's this? As a family lawyer, feeling empathy, which is important, is something which is important. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if you get empathy fatigue, Joe, because it must be something that is very, very tiring. I would imagine that would be quite tough. When I was an HR director, don't worry, I'm in full recovery now. I felt a lot of empathy fatigue because I was involved a lot in industrial. I did 55 industrial tribunals, and God, it was hard work. But I prided myself in trying to understand, even the rascals, and I had a few, why they were doing what they were doing. Really, Michelle's family are Quakers. I did not know that. That's fascinating. Have you heard that saying before? It comes from one of my favourite writers, a chap called Parker Palmer, who is a Quaker and one of the best storytellers I've ever heard. If you've never heard of Parker Palmer, he actually wrote a book called Let Your Life Speak, and I got it from a radio show that I love. He's a brilliant storyteller. I love him to bits. So that is basically it for this week, guys. I hope you found it interesting. I hope it didn't scare you with the idea of fake media and how there's a tsunami of it coming, which isn't getting the media that it should be getting. It really isn't getting the media. I'll put a link in the description for some reading in that space, because I'm sure it's piqued some of your interest. But the great thing about this, and I hinted at it earlier, if you start to reveal your stories, no matter how mundane, how short, they can be single words, single sentences, it comes back. You get back what you put in if you tell stories. That empathy machine, the muscles, you get better and better and better at it. But what I'm hoping to do with this show, and I've been trying to do since the beginning, is by saying to people, look, everybody can be a storyteller. It's part of a evolutionary process. And whether Bloom's right or wrong about empathy, at the moment, I'm happy to say that he's wrong. I think empathy is a powerful antidote for some of the difficult experiences we have to deal with over the next few years. And hopefully in November, things might improve slightly. But anyway, thank you. What are you saying, Michelle? You haven't heard of it, but they don't let us sing in meetings. Right, okay. Are you used to singing in meetings, Michelle? Okay, well, thank you ever so much, folks, for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed that. I have. I just want to thank everybody for contributing. Joe, especially for your idea around the lovely piece of sculpture at the beginning. Hope it didn't depress people. Thanks, Jill. Thank you very much. I do my best. Try to be authentic. And Shelley, thank you very much. Nice to see some new people here this week. That's lovely, and I really appreciate you. I really, really do. So I'll just double check if there's any more comments, and if not, I'll skiddle off. What happens next is I produce this onto YouTube. I edit it and put it onto YouTube. The new LinkedIn algorithm doesn't really take kindly to putting longer videos onto it. So I'm going to be doing a little edit like I did last week as well. Adam. Hello, Adam. How are you? Thanks, buddy. Look forward to catching up over a drink soon. Nice to see you. Adam and I used to work together a long time ago, Adam, wasn't it? That's lovely to see you. Thank you. Not depressing at all. Thanks, Jill. That's cheered me up. So this was Scott MacArthur. Thank you very much. And I really hope that you've got something out of this. And I'll see you again next week. And next week, I nearly forgot. Next week, what am I doing next week? Yeah, next week, I'm going to give you another tool. So I've given you story storming, which is it's not that structured. It's just like almost like a behavior or a process that you have to put yourself through. I'm actually going to give you a 4-step model next week, where it's not me. It's not I didn't invent it, but it's not well known. It comes from philosophy. And I'm going to use that as the basis of the whole talk next week. And hopefully, I've got a couple of people who have already said they'd quite like to come on and tell a story next week. So we might have a guest next week. But at the moment, it's a bit difficult. People are trying their best, but it's all a bit busy for people. So bear with me if that doesn't happen. So thank you very much. See you next week.